Well, good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Bill.
Today we're talking about something exciting at FNC. We're talking about a patent.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but last month we were notified, finally, that the patent for our appraisal score was finally awarded.
Well, congratulations. And there are three FNC folks that have been involved heavily in this from the beginning. Kathy Kuhn, Gwen Magrisso, and yourself. And let's step back for a second before we really talk about the patent, and let's talk about the appraisal score, the methodology, why it's important to lenders and other folks in the industry, and just give us a brief overview.
Sure. FNC began building automation rules to review the appraisal, or in some
Because we
cases,
found no two lenders had the same review rules.
Right.
They had the same requirements, but they didn't implement them the same way.
Well, not only did no two lenders, but no two reviewers at the same lender.
So even though the requirements were the same, they had to follow the Fannie Freddie Seller Guide,
Right.
had to follow the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice and the Banking Thrift Regulatory Guidelines. But they were all implemented all differently.
Everybody reviewed it differently, and you know, in fairness to the reviewers, there's a lot of information in an appraisal. How do you systematically go through all of that and catch everything?
Oh, well, our Yoda, Kathy Kuhn, came along,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
she had the way.
Right, and so we built these, what we call our generally accepted appraisal rules, extensive set of rules that look at risk, compliance, data validation, all of those things. But then that's a lot of rules, you know, and so the lenders were asking us to see if we could give them some guidance about which appraisals we really should look at, and so that's what we use the score for.
So if we look at this and we look at all of these different rules, the accountants have generally accepted accounting principles.
Uh-huh.
The auditors have generally accepted auditing standards. And Kathy, Gwen, and you developed generally accepted appraisal rules, or GAR for short. They've got compliance, risk, external validation, and uniform appraisal data set validation embedded in the rules. So it's like a Mayo Clinic examination of the appraisal. And then, after that's done, what the lender really wants to know is the value any good?
Well, and so we worked with several big national lenders to identify the appraisals that they would like to be pulled out for additional review.
If the value's bad.
Exactly. And so they went through their production appraisals and identified the ones that had been pulled out of production to have the value readjusted, or at least examined, and because of certain issues in the appraisal. And then they were reviewed by a collateral review committee at the lender, and then they determined which ones. They said, okay, this is the batch that we'd really like to have designated.
We just can't hold our nose anymore on these.
Right, and so we created a data set from that and then built a appraisal score using a statistical methodology that's fairly complex, and it was able to properly separate those types of appraisals from all the rest of them, all the rest of the production.
So the lender wants to know if the value estimate is bad.
Right, and you don't always know. I mean, there's no indication in the appraisal necessarily that the valuation is bad, but there are a lot of indications that there may be some concerns about the value. And so the appraisal score is essentially a confidence score on the value in the appraisal.
It means it tells you how good it is or not.
It tells you how much uncertainty there is.
Exactly, and risk, as we know, is uncertainty.
Right, and so we've had reviews, audits by most of the major lenders, and they have consistently concluded that it is properly segmenting the appraisals that they would want further review on from the rest of the appraisals.
So now the United States Patent and Trademark Office has gone through their due diligence, and they've gone through their routines and issued a patent.
All right, and the patent is the appraisal evaluation and scoring and methodology. So it covers, you know, the way that we score it and the methodology that we use, which is based upon all the rules that we fire.
That is fantastic. So how can a lender use this, and why is this important as they approach their individual loans and their portfolio?
Well, you know, one of the ways that, before we got involved in this, one of the ways that in fact, almost all lenders process their appraisals was that they would have the reviewers look at them, and they would designate some of them to have maybe a more detailed review. But it was basically by glancing at these or based upon certain loan criteria or something. And then after the funding occurred, they would go back and do some due diligence.
So where to put the money out.
Right, and they would generally find that there were some issues.
And nobody would give the money back.
No, and they would only sample maybe 5 or 10% after the funding, And so what we're able to do now with this is that we're able to do 100% of the review up front, pre-funding.
So even if it's retail or wholesale or correspondent in a re-underwrite, a lender is able to take an appraisal, score it, and know before they put the money out if there's a lot of uncertainty.
Exactly, and they can do a detailed focus review on the ones where there are low scores and where they need a further review, and that's going to improve the overall quality of the process.
Well, that's at a loan level. Let's talk about how a lender tracks their risk in their whole book over time and compared to their peer groups.
Well, one of the things that we have been doing as a result of these scores is that when the lenders, and most of the major originators are using the score today, we look at the distribution of those scores over time. And so any given lender can look at the distribution of the scores on their book versus the whole rest of the industry. And that enables them to measure essentially how risky are the valuations that they're acquiring relative to everyone else.
It also allows them to determine if they're, I would think, if they're out of step with the rest of the industry.
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
They got it dialed back too conservatively, or they got it dialed too loose.
Right. And different lenders might choose to accept different score levels, just as they would with FICO.
Sure.
One lender might say that for this particular product, we're going to have a FICO cutoff of whatever. And in the same manner, they can have different cutoffs for different levels of reviews with the appraisal score.
Maybe if the credit score is higher, they let the appraisal score go lower.
The only problem with that, and that's true, but the only problem with that is that certainly on compliance issues and some of those issues, those are good justifications for putbacks.
Absolutely.
If that goes south at any point.
Absolutely. So one last thing, let's talk about peer group analysis, is this appraisal score. So we've talked about individual loan level analysis, and a lender can look at how their risk changes over time by simply looking at the risk profile of their own portfolio, what rules are firing, not firing, what their scores are doing over time. They also can compare themselves to their peer group.
Right, it's important to compare it with the peers because the score itself varies with the market conditions. And so if you're setting certain standards and comparing yourself to where you were a few years ago, those may not be the relevant scores to compare because the market changes, and as a result the score changes. For example, in a particular market, if there are a lot of foreclosures or if the market has simply lost a lot of its liquidity, that means that there are fewer comparables that are relate to the subject property, and therefore there's more uncertainty about the value of the property. That's reflected in the score.
As we wind this down today, if our clients want to find out more about this, how do they do that?
Well, we have information on our website about the score.
A white paper, let me guess.
We have white papers you can download. We can be glad to send you white papers.
Sure, for insomnia.
All right. Or you could read the whole, 1,000-page patent award, and that would really put you to sleep.
Sure. So, this is FNC's Morning View. I'm Bill Rayburn with Bob Dorsey. We hope you all have a fantastic day.